from Levi. Question for Curt. In operationalizing testimonial truth, do you account for cognitive biases and human tendency toward post hoc rationalization?
Uh, this is one of those questions I'm like, either what I think is obvious is not obvious, or I don't understand the question. So in testimonial truth, it consists of what can I testify to? And we have, what, 8 or 9 dimensions that you can testify to. You can testify realism and naturalism, internal consistency, external correspondence, operational possibility, rational choice, individual rational choice, reciprocal choice, and some, depending on if you want to break these up or not, within stated limits, and fully accounted within stated limits, and most parsimoniously stated. You should also probably add that your speech is warranted and warrantable. So what these are is these are things that it's possible to testify to. And so you can only claim what's true if you can testify to them. What the value of this checklist is in telling you, do you really understand? Can you really claim this thing is true? Or do you just see a pattern here? So the whole point of this is that what you can testify to is it has no bearing on bias. In other words, if you can testify to it, if it's testifiable, it's not a question of bias or any kind. Instead, having the checklist is there to help you overcome the biases. In other words, how do I develop it? It's the same thing with reciprocity. What's productive, fully informed? Correct me if I get this wrong, Martin. Productive, fully informed, a voluntary transfer of demonstrated interest, free of imposition of costs on the demonstrated interests of others by externality, and within the limits of warranty and liability. In other words, don't make claims about things that if you're wrong, you can't compensate for. So how do I account for it? The whole point is to eradicate these biases, and the reason to learn testimonial truth is so that you can overcome your biases, just as the reason to overcome to learn reciprocity and demonstrated interests is so that you could overcome your biases. But the point of these tests, these 3 tests, demonstrated interest, reciprocity, and testimony, is that they eradicate your capacity to apply biases if you can testify to them.
Well, I would still say that biases could make a lot of people unable to really testify. But I see that as sort of a new role for lawyers, helping their clients testify.
Yes.
We're certainly eliminating their job of defending actual criminals with knowledge of doing that.
Yes. So I think there's something subtle in what Levi's asking here that I might want to answer. And that's that there is a tendency, especially among conservatives, because we tend to, the feminine mind tends to look for external validation, and the conservative mind tends to look for internal validation. In other words, we like to make decisions of our own merit based on our own competence and skill. And then when we don't feel we can, then we go to others and ask for more information. But we tend to make the decisions ourselves rather than conform to external decisions. That's just the male versus female difference. So there's a tendency here to think that testimonial truth, demonstrated interest, and reciprocity are that the self is sufficient for the auditing of them, when realistically this goes to a very profound topic, which is called closure. And the only closure is full correspondence with reality. In other words, this a lot of the stuff that's common, the criticism of logic over the 20th century, is that there is no closure. It's like where all this Gödel's stuff. There's just no way to get to logical closure except the dimensions of reality I mentioned, which was testimonial truth. So when you're trying to do something yourself, do you have the knowledge to falsify your own thoughts? And as Martin is suggesting very strongly, which is true, is are you able to be intellectually honest enough? And we know it's very hard for women, and it's hard for some men, and it's hard for men and women for different reasons. Women are biased by wishful thinking, and men are biased by overconfidence. And so when you look at these things, overcoming these things, there's a reason why we call it adversarial competition when we're talking about discovery of the truth, is that if it requires action, the only way you know is if you've actually done it, or you've got evidence that it can be done this way and it produces the cause and effect you've claimed. Well, if some things require words, right? You require words of other people. The only way you know is to test it by running it. So my point here is that we've done the best as humanly possible, because it literally is the best humanly possible, for producing a checklist for the internal auditing of what you can say. However, until you pass it past others, you may not be sure that your internal auditing is as valid or as strong as as your demonstration of that auditing is by the action against others. Does that make, Francis, did I do okay with that one?
Yeah, I think you just answered the how question, right? The how questions you can't run. It's like you can't rely on your own internal self-diagnostics to ensure that you didn't introduce bias into the test for testimonial truth. And so you have to run. So for example, down and run it by somebody else, and then
Yes.
they can point out faults in each one of these dimensions of testifiability.
Right. I always feel when I don't know something, I just make 100 arguments with 100 people until the answers that I run out of objections. In other words, all the objections start coming up the same, and I can answer all of them. And sometimes that takes a long time. Sometimes it doesn't. But not all decisions require the kind of truth that we're looking for, right? Right? You know, the true enough is true enough, right? It's true enough.
It's a level of precision.
Right. The level of precision is necessary. So so you can if you depends on how true you want something to be. If you want to make a truth statement about mankind or politics or economics, you have to pretty much exhaust it. If you want to do, well, do I want to have chocolate or vanilla ice cream with my for dessert? I mean, that's not a very hard decision to make. You can internally make that by preferences.
And you probably don't have to collect statistics over the last 100
Yeah,
times where you
exactly.
made that choice.
Well, I mean, you know, and it's like the one I get is because my aspiness is when I offend. Most of my really guilty feelings are offending somebody or really badly when that wasn't my intention, right? You know, I just couldn't understand how that could be interpreted that way, right? And so almost everything, or I said something and I didn't mean it that way, and somebody interpreted it that way or whatever. We all have our little guilt things, and those are mine, right? So until you run, even if you're really confident, until you run things by other people, you don't really know some things, right? So it's just I love social media for this reason. It allows me to run tests.
So
All right.
Levi has a follow-up question. He says, when you're trying to measure or verify the truthfulness of someone's testimony, how do we account for identify instances where they might be justifying their action after the fact? How do we account for or identify instances where they might be justifying their actions after the fact.
All right, so I want to read this. Wait a minute. So this is number 3, right?
No, this is actually related to question number 2. I asked Levi is online, and I asked him to clarify his question, and that's what he posted.
Can you give me it again? Because I was trying to figure out. I thought you were going to 3, and I got confused.
No,
So
let me. So he says, when we are trying to measure or verify the truthfulness of someone else's testimony, how do we account for or identify instances where they might be justifying their action after the fact?
Why does it matter if they justify it after the fact?
I guess this is a longer version of just saying, how can we tell someone is lying? So how can we tell if someone is lying unintentionally by injecting bias in their process of providing testimonial truth?
Well, boy, what is it? I'm not wrong that these questions are getting harder, right? These questions are, they keep
Like I
giving us
said,
harder
we
questions.
exhausted the low-hanging fruits.
Jesus. All right. So in this sense, let's say you're in a trial, right? What you're trying to do is collect the facts about the event itself that's in question, not the person's opinion of it, just the facts of it. And then in your mind, you say, what are the rational incentives? That's what juries do. They say, with these facts, what are the rational incentives? And then later, you bring on a person who comes up and says they justify them. Now, there are 2 questions here. The first is, if the facts say and the incentives say that somebody had a means, motive, and opportunity, they did, right? Okay, so this person had means, motive, and opportunity. And if you're saying that there is a harm, there was. So there's a harm, there's means, motives, and opportunity. Okay, what does it matter what the person says? So now you're trying to go back, and now you want to know what the person's post hoc justification of it from. Now what you're doing is you're trying to see if the testimony they give about their state of mind, incentives, whatever, is correspondent with the facts. In other words, is it testifiable? Is it correspondent with the facts? You would think this would be hard. Turns out it's relatively easy. Juries are incredibly good at this. Why? Because we know when someone's bullshitting us. Because there's no correspondence. So I mean, this is one of those things of, you find out that in the study of juries, they make their decision up in like the first 3 fucking minutes because they can tell you're full of shit. It's amazing. It's not the first 3 minutes. I'm over exaggerating. It's the first 15 minutes or half hour or whatever. 20 minutes. It doesn't take them a long time. So in other words, so the problem is, can you get enough facts into the discussion to determine the rational incentives, right? That's what you're worried about. When the person gives you their excuses, you're still stuck with the harm occurred, means, motive, and opportunity. All you can do, all the person's story can do is tell you that, well, I didn't do it by intent, I did it by accident, or didn't do it by intent, I did it because of a crime of passion or impulse. But I mean, if you've got the facts and you can determine the rational incentives, it's that natural conflict is usually very easy for people to tell. If you gave the best, so this is one of those really good examples of why I say I prefer people to give me an example of a specific case that I can illustrate it, because talking in abstractions is generally hard. It's usually when you show the method will falsify. In other words, what we're talking about will falsify almost everything that's possible. And it turns out the juries are very good at it. And you just have to do enough examples that the person begins to see that the pattern, there's no way out of it. But when you're talking about generalizations, we don't know what's happening is there's a lot of suggestion and substitution going on in the mind of the audience. So they make all sorts of stuff up that wouldn't be possible to make up with a real case.